Welcome to Building Wealthy Habits podcast. Now, this features content and conversations with me, Randy Barkley, Jeremiah Lee, along with Laura Lee. On this podcast, we share financial advice from a team of certified financial planners, including a California licensed attorney, an MBA professional with collective experience of over 40 years.
Okay, this week's episode, we talk about the history of financial planning. It's for anybody who is interested in this industry and maybe picking an advisor. We talk about the history of how we developed into where we're at today about financial advisors. We also then talk about how to select a financial advisor, what you might want to be looking for. As a third point, we end with where this industry is headed. There's so many technology adjustments and changes and what financial advice may look like in the coming years. I hope you enjoy the episode.
So we just did some remodeling, and we're still trying to figure out. I feel like we're still in the move-in stage in our office a little bit. We've got the offices, we got the desks in, but we still haven't kind of like put the final touch on things right yet.
And I think it's because those final touches, I don't have clarity on exactly what we want them to look like. So Jeremiah, behind you is a work of art. It's a print, a Chagall print, that actually used to be hanging in our home. So it has a little bit of sentimental value, but it has very bright colors, right, which if any of our listeners have visited our office, there's not a lot of bright colors in our office. And so it kind of stands out.
Yeah, and the art that we do have, we have some farm scenes, we have some landscapes, things like that are just on the walls. And so the discussion has been around art of say, what should we do? Should each office have their own artwork, put up whatever they want?
And that's a little scary because some people have no taste, all right?
Or different taste.
No, but I'm just saying, you walk in, you're going, really?
That's right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's some art that was picked from people that previously worked here too. So the person in that office that was not even artwork that they selected.
They inherited the office. Yeah.
I do want to take this moment.
Well, we could spend a lot of time talking about this, and I'm sure our listening audience doesn't really care about that.
Well, hey, if our listening audience does have an opinion or has seen something that they like, please send us pictures or ideas.
I know.
We're not committing.
I said, people say, well, you should have this on your wall. I don't think so.
No, but I do want to give a plug. We do have one of my favorite artists. She also happens to be local. She's working on a couple paintings for our conference room. So if anybody hasn't visited the office, they should be done here, I guess, in the next couple months or so. So we'll have that.
Wait a minute, you're gonna remove all my paintings, all my prints?
Surprise! Yep. Okay, so what do we have to talk about today?
Moving on. That's right.
Wait a minute. I'm having some difficulty here. I'm having some detachment here.
Total upgrade. Don't you worry. All right. Well, Jeremiah, you better break this up and kick us off. What are we talking about
we are
today?
talking about the history of. We have a short series coming up, the history of all sorts of things, of how we got to where we are. And today we're talking about the history of financial planning. It's a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. But
why do we do what we do, right?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how we got here. So you go all the way back, think of Great Depression era, and the SEC stepped in, was created.
I can barely remember the Great Depression,
Yeah, no personal memories here, right? But the SEC was created. They started.
I'm pretty close.
Oh, come on. No, but your parents remember the Great Depression.
My parents were children during it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's a whole generation, right? That many have passed away at this point, but a whole generation that grew up, through the Depression, and as they became adults, the SEC existed. There's a number of
who wrote
acts.
the SEC guidelines? Do you know?
No, go ahead.
Oh, this is a question. This is a random question. Joseph Kennedy. And the reason that he was slighted to do that is because the SEC, FDR at that time said, nobody knows where all the worst, the worst. I don't want to be. I want to be careful here what I say. but somebody who could manipulate the system as well as he could, he would know how to write the rules. Okay. And so he wrote all of the guidelines. He wrote the original block. Yeah.
he could navigate the system.
I think that's really interesting.
FDR, that was like 40s. Right? When was he president?
Okay, the listeners are going to go, what?
Yeah.
No, the FDR was elected during the 1930s. I think it was 1931. Hoover was the president before him, and the Depression really started in 1929. I think the next election cycle was 31, I think. And Hoover got kicked out, and FDR came in, and then he was a president for how many terms? Do you know?
Well, then that did overlap, though, the 40s, so I'm not totally
It did. It was World War II.
I think of FDR, I think of World War II, I think of labor rights and laws and the industrial. Anyways.
Anyway,
transition.
The impact of that period of time changed the economic landscape, because we have Social Security that period of time. That's when Social Security got started. There was a huge issue regarding employee benefits, workman's comp. Yep. There's all the child labor laws that kind of came out of the early part. Whole kinds of things, just a whole gamut of things that came through that period of time.
Let's talk about the financial services industry, and at that time, it didn't really exist as it does today. Jeremy,
it was broker. There was brokers, but it was really the Wild West. What caused the Great Depression is that banks could take their depositors' money and actually leverage it, borrow from another bank to buy the stock market. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, you have this kind of like what happened in in the 80s with the real estate market collapse, because you had this leveraging going out, and it just created this waterfall. Everything just started falling all at once, right?
Right. So around this time period, we're talking 1920s to 1940s, you would have seen people who worked in tax specifically. You would have seen people that worked in estate planning specifically. You would have seen stockbrokers.
Stockbrokers were very common.
Not necessarily the industry of financial planning or financial advisory services didn't exist.
Yeah, those are piecemeal providers. Like you'd have a tax person, you have an attorney, you'd have an insurance person, you have a stockbroker. And stockbrokers, it was a transaction. You would call them up, or they would call you. I think there's a number of movies, we have these, wirehouses, usually from the 80s. Yeah. But calling up people saying, hey, we've got a great hot tip. You want to put $5,000 into this. And it's a sales transaction, and people who were engaged in buying and selling stocks were either being sold something, or they had a broker that they would call and say, hey, give me 5 shares of X. And there was transaction fees, there's commissions. That's kind of how the industry continued for a while. And I think, there's a number of, like you said, Randy, there's a massive overhaul of our system. But a key thing that started coming up after that as time went forward is we moved from pensions to 401ks, right? And it gets to the 50s, 60s, 70s. We now have people that, instead of being taken care of by your organization, the company you've spent 30, 40 years with.
The pension, right?
Your pension, you now have the ability to control on the good side, and potentially the responsibility to do it right on the negative side of your own 401k. Right. And I think it moved from, you think of the 80s and the 90s, before financial advising was hugely popular. I think 70s is when it started as a profession. But 70s, 80s, 90s, it was still picking up steam. And you think of how many people took their 401ks and tried to figure out what to do with it. And they were sold a bill of goods. They were put in a risky stock, all sorts of things.
Well, I think the 401k was a transfer of responsibility by the employer to the employee. There was a dramatic shift in saying, we'll allow you to put money on your own and we'll match some of it, but we don't want to be responsible for the end result. In other words, the income side of the pension. We want you to take on that responsibility. And the biggest concern I have is always when I look at 401ks is that they gave up professional management, because there is a value in professional management. We just talked about it earlier. By having proper financial advice, it adds, what is it? How much percentage?
There's a study that says 7% a year to your 401k balance, of avoiding some of the poor mistakes that people make, getting good life advice, as well as the investment management itself. It's a great statistic in our industry, right?
So I want to slow us down. I want to go back just a little bit, because we didn't just have the transition between pension and 401k, employer to employee responsibility. We also had the introduction of Social Security. So talk about FDR. And so really, when we talk about the genesis of the idea of financial planning, there was a gentleman who's given credit for it. His name was Loren Dutton, and it was in the 1960s, late 1960s, that he was actually
I've actually met Loren Dutton, by the way.
Really?
And you guys here read about him, but I actually met the man.
Oh, neat. Where did you meet him?
Well, I met him at a financial planning conference, and he's a neat gentleman, very humble, and he was kind of like the father, so to speak, of financial planning.
It said that in his previous career, he was a successful salesman. He was actually on a trip, family sabbatical, is what I was reading, in Europe, and he was talking to some Europeans, and they were asking, as prosperous as Americans are, why aren't they planning for their own retirement? They are now so reliant on Social Security. And in an earlier episode, Dad, I remember we talked about Social Security, and you said from the very beginning, Social Security was never intended to provide or replace 100% of your income. In fact, I think you said, was it 40% was kind of the intention?
It was always set up to be about 40%, and it was never designed to be 100%. And of course, then it was a non-voluntary contributory plan. In other words, the employer had to put a certain amount in, and the employee had to put a certain amount in. And of course, there's a lot of issues we could talk. I mean, we could expand a lot on the whole aspect of Social Security, but the biggest issue is mortality. When they first set up the plan, and that's one of the reasons why, going back to the 401k versus pension, is that the dynamics, the mortality rate has expanded dramatically, and all these numbers are askew. They don't have enough money.
People
to take care of
living
shorter
lives.
Right.
We're now living longer lives. And so Denton is credited for kind of coming back to America after his trip in Europe and kind of starting this idea. And so what he did was he held a meeting in December of 1969. He organized a meeting in Chicago with 13 financial industry leaders, and they created a new profession. So the Society for Financial Counseling, which now has evolved, and you have various organizations that contribute and have really housed the curriculum, the education that was developed around this idea of being a financial advisor. And so we're going to talk about the Certified Financial Planner certification organization specifically. So that was all kind of happening and evolving, that education, that curriculum, between over the 1970s and the 1980s. And then in the 90s, we really hit a peak, and that was because of what advancement? You guys know?
The internet. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the internet changed everything. Yep. It changed how information flowed and how the speed of it, how you get to information. Of course, this can become better and better. It's scary to some people, but I see it as, I love Google. I love to be able to just say something now. You can do it just verbally and you get an answer.
Right. And
the question is, does it make your life better financially? Because we're in the financial side of it. And does it provide for you a better path for financial success?
Yep. And I think you fast forward today, it's not quite today, but as we get through the 90s, the 2000s, the internet, people can find information. They can look up what a Roth IRA is. There's advisors available. And part of this shift is, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but financially they're moving from these broker-dealer transactional relationships into these advisory RIA models.
RIA stands for?
The Registered Investment Advisor.
Yeah, so our listening audience may not understand what an RIA is.
And this industry is wrought with alphabet soup.
Oh my goodness.
And it's confusing for people who work in the industry. There are so many certifications and